USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Week in Review podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at USCHO.com. A look at this weekend in college hockey and a review of the top news of the week.
This is the Weekend Review podcast for Monday, February 3rd, 2020. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. This episode is sponsored by the NCAA Frozen Four. April 9th and 11th in Detroit. For tickets, visit ncaa.com/Frozen4. Well, Jim, it's the strange situation of our games of the week not having been played yet on Monday, as we have the Beanpot semis in line for that this week. But the premier matchup this week beyond that had to be in the NCHC, Minnesota Duluth at Denver, ending Denver's unbeaten streak and sweeping Denver at home. This is a real statement for Minnesota Duluth as they keep pace in the NCHC race.
Yeah, I mean, talk about a time that you needed it. I think that they've played pretty good hockey. It's been consistent hockey all year, but everybody thinks of Minnesota Duluth as a team that can sometimes turn it on toward the end of the season, and this weekend proved it. You're able to go on the road into a place that is very difficult to win, pull out a weekend sweep of Denver on their home ice, and now here is Minnesota Duluth right in the middle of things in the NCHC. I don't know if there's going to be much of a competition for first place in that league, but in terms of what they accomplished this weekend, taking all 6 points, they're now in the conversation for the NCAA tournament. They're in a conversation for a high home ice bid. I mean, everything is now seemingly falling in line for the Bulldogs.
Yeah, wouldn't 3 in a row be something there? The Bulldogs, I'm sure, would love to have back those 2 losses a few weeks ago against St. Cloud. But I'm always thinking, when I think Minnesota Duluth down the stretch, I think what people have to say about Scott Sandelin, about how he's unflappable, and his personality conveys across to that team when it gets into crunch time.
I think a lot with Sandy is his ability to connect with players. And he is one of the best coaches out there that can do that. And he's impressed me with his ability to retain some really good NHL caliber players for maybe one extra year. He's done that continuously over his career. And I think that is something that shows just the relationship he has. He's got these players buying into everything he says, and they listen to him, and they sit down and approach it, yes, as a coach-player relationship, but understanding that he's a friend and a mentor as well. And I think that's a big part of what he's able to deliver to his players. Not every coach has that ability, and I know fans might be sitting there saying, oh, well, who doesn't like their coach? And boy, go across college hockey and ask players who doesn't like their coach. There's plenty of them out there. It does feel, though, that Sandy's players really respect him and really get along with him, and that's a big check mark for a coach when you're trying to be successful.
And, of course, one sort of interesting note, every game Hunter Shepard starts, he sets a new record. He's now up to 107 consecutive starts. Yeah,
pretty impressive. I mean, talk about an Iron Man. And, it's meant a lot to the program. He's been probably arguably the best goaltender that program has ever seen. And they've seen some really good goaltenders at Duluth. So very impressive what he continues to do.
Speaking of impressive, North Dakota keeps on a tear. Kind of very different wins, a 1-0 win Friday and an 8-1 stomping of Colorado College. North Dakota is getting close to being able to clinch the NCHC.
Yeah, this is the one conference I think might clinch earlier than others. I think it feels like every other conference wants to go down to its final weekend, how tight things are right now. But with the NCHC, North Dakota, you're right. They're starting to pull away. It felt like Friday night, the 1-0 game against CC. CC probably threw everything they had at them that night, wore themselves out a little bit because the next night, North Dakota just absolutely hammered them. An 8-1 win, that is a big decision that shows how well this team can play when they put their mind to it. It does seem that, and I'm not trying to say that Friday they didn't have their A game. I didn't actually see the games, but you certainly get up against some very difficult opponents at times. Colorado College, despite the fact that they're in last place in the league, they're still a very good opponent. And when you are met with that and still able to pull out that victory, it says a lot for where this North Dakota team is headed.
And when we talk about Hobie Baker time, Jordan Kawaguchi of North Dakota, creeping up on the points leadership in the country on Jack Dugan of Providence. So those are two names. I think those are probably going to be the two top names bandied about, at least among forwards, when it comes to Hobie time for that committee. Well, why don't we switch to the Big Ten? Notre Dame, a huge weekend on the road at Penn State. Win on Friday, 5 of 6 points on the weekend with an 11-round shootout win over Penn State on Saturday. And Notre Dame is right back in the mix. In fact, 1 point separates the top 5 teams in the Big Ten. It's nuts.
Notre Dame is now tied with Minnesota and Michigan State with 28 points, Ohio State and Penn State 29 points. This is now a bigger race than we probably envisioned it. We just didn't see Notre Dame heading in the right direction. I actually kind of thought that Penn State would sweep this weekend, that they would then really jump out to a good lead in this league, and it might just be Penn State and Ohio State that we would be talking about at the end of the weekend. Instead, Notre Dame getting 5 here, that's a really big weekend for them. They needed it. I mean, they're still a long ways off. They're a 500 team in the conference. They're a game above 500 overall. This is not a team that's going to march into the NCAA tournament. They're going to have to either put together an unbelievable run here down the stretch or win their conference title. But you've just put yourself back in a really good position that you could get into maybe a top 3 for the playoffs. Things go right. Maybe you win the conference after all of the problems that they had. Basically, I think I did the math out. I can't remember exactly what it was. I think it was 4-11-4 or 4-14-4. That was the stretch coming into this weekend that they had just gone through. I mean, that's a lot of losses. So to still be relevant is pretty impressive.
You got to wonder if the problem has been confidence, because it's certainly not talent. And when a team gets in a place where they doubt themselves, or if something goes wrong in a game and they start to say, oh, here it is again, that can really undermine a team's performance. But a weekend like this can be the kind of thing that can turn around and give a real boost to a team down the stretch run.
Confidence is everything. And, I was talking to Ryan Soderquist, the Bentley head coach, the other night, and he was talking about some of the struggles his team has had over the past couple of years. And he was, just giving the example of how many times his team would get out to a 2-0 lead. And then as soon as they gave up that first goal, it was like they were giving up 3. And he'd have to sit there on the bench and say, guys, we gave up 1 goal. We still have the lead. We're winning. Be confident in yourselves. So you hear how coaches, they struggle with getting their players to maintain that level of confidence. And obviously what was happening at Notre Dame, that's a big part of it. And so we'll see if this will turn them around. Obviously both of these wins, very good wins. The ability even to get points out of the first game where they trailed late and then had to go 11 rounds of a shootout, all of it very impressive what they were able to pull off this weekend.
Before the season started, everybody was talking about this possibly being a big year for Wisconsin. Well, the 2 youngest teams in college hockey played each other in Big Ten action over the weekend, and it was Minnesota who swept Wisconsin. You got to wonder about the Badgers having an opportunity for the postseason at all right now.
Yeah, it's a struggle right now for Wisconsin. They're not playing well. I think a lot of people looked at some of those rookies that were coming in, Cole Caulfield and other names, and just said, boy, this is it. Here's our chance. But if you're relying on 18 and 17-year-old players to come in and immediately have impact, yes, they have the ability to do it. There's no doubt. And their draft position showed how good these players are. But at the same time, they can't be your leaders. And the one thing that I feel most about this Wisconsin team is that they maybe just lack that upper-class leadership. And that is what takes so many teams. It doesn't have to be talent on the ice. Sometimes it just has to be the person to step up and hold teammates accountable, the person to inspire, the person to give confidence. We just talked about confidence. Some of the upperclassmen, sometimes they're just the people that can teach some of the younger players how to play more confidently. So I think that we've seen it with many teams. We think about some of the great Boston University recruiting classes that didn't turn out over the last 3, 4, 5 years. That can be a problem, and it does take a lot of confidence of the fans away from your team, and that's usually what creates rumblings of why coaches shouldn't stay in their position, should stay in their position. I'm never a guy to ever call for a coach's job like some journalists do, but you've got to worry when teams just can't live up to expectations, and right now that's the case for Wisconsin.
Well, the other thing you got to remember with the younger players, and this is what has been one of the contributors to parity in college hockey, is these are 18-year-olds who may be playing against 23 or 24-year-old seniors. There's a huge amount of physical development that happens between 18 and 23 or 24 for a lot of players. And, an 18-year-old may have a lot of skill, but still not have developed the strength. 2 years down the road, another 20 pounds on them can make a big difference. And that is a huge part of it, too.
Yeah, certainly. And you hear NHL executives say that that's why they like college hockey, because there is that opportunity to physically develop and build a body and put on that muscle that you need. And you're right. It's hard for young players to play against older, but then it goes back to coaches. Coaches complain sometimes that these young guys are out there against older players. Well, recruit older players and you don't have to worry about it. You're not required to take the blue chip 18-year-old, 17-year-old who will have a little bit of difficulty playing against some of the older, bigger bodies.
One other mention in the Big Ten, I'll just mention in passing, Ohio State got off a losing streak, splitting with Michigan, picking up the win on Saturday. But let's turn to the WCHA. Bemidji State keeps on a roll. They swept Bowling Green, and Bowling Green is a team whose fortunes have really sunk as the season has gone on.
Yeah, great weekend for Bemidji. I mean, they're just trying to stay relevant. When you have a team like Minnesota State that has an .841 winning percentage in the conference, you almost expect them just to be running away with things. But Bemidji State, they're staying within striking distance. They actually gained a point as Minnesota State got only 5 out of 6 points on the weekend. Bemidji State gains one. They're only 5 points behind. That is striking distance to me, and I know you're really looking for a big falter from Minnesota State, and it might not be there. But if they do falter, there's Bemidji State having had a great second half here. They're being consistent, they're being deliberate in everything they seem to be able to do, and they're winning games. And when you put together the streaks like they have had over the last month and a half, you're making yourself relevant to the conversation. They will get that opportunity if they can stay within striking distance to possibly win the conference on that final weekend when they host Minnesota State. The big story for Bemidji will be the next 3 weeks. They're idle this week. Then they get to go to Northern Michigan for 2. Then they go to Alaska for 2. So there's a lot of travel involved between now and the time that they would have that opportunity to play Minnesota State. You have no room for error, but if you can get to that final weekend knowing that you just need to sweep it home to win a conference championship, it's a nice position to be in.
And even if you don't catch Minnesota State, if you finish second, the only time you have to face the Mavericks is going to be in a single elimination championship game for the league. So that puts you in a good position there. I like anybody's chances in a single game.
Yeah, good. That's a good point. You forget that is the big benefit of getting to second place, is that if you have a dominating team like a Minnesota State, you get a chance if you both take care of business in the playoffs to face off, and that single elimination game is, like you just said, anything can happen.
There was plenty of action out east as well. We'll get to that in a moment. First, a word from our sponsor, the NCAA Frozen Four, April 9th and 11th in Detroit.
This is the USCHO Weekend Review podcast from US College Hockey Online.
Every time you show up, every time you make your presence heard, whether you clap your hands or stomp your feet, lead the chant or join the chorus. However you choose to be a fan, you make the game. The NCAA Frozen Four, April 9th and 11th at Little Caesars Arena in Detroit. Visit ncaa.com/Frozen4 to get your tickets today.
Let's continue with the Weekend Review podcast from USCHO.com for Monday, February 3rd, 2020. I'm Ed Trefzger with Jim Connelly. And Jim, we talked to Red Gendron, head coach of Maine, on our Spotlight podcast earlier in the week, and talked to him about how he was positioned pretty well. How about Maine? In a league now where only 3 points separates first place from eighth place, Maine swept Merrimack, and 3 weeks ago this wouldn't have been the case, but now they're in the conversation not only for home ice, but even for winning Hockey East.
It's such a strange place that Maine has been able to put themselves. I think it was easy, and I did it myself, and I followed this league closely to realize, A, how many times they had to go on the road in the first half of the season, and B, how they played the best teams. And sometimes you don't know who the best teams are until the end of the year, but they've gotten their series with BC and BU out of the way. They've gotten UMass Lowell out of the way. Now they get to finish their season with 2 games against Merrimack, 2 games against Connecticut, a single game that's this weekend at home against Northeastern, and then a home and home against Providence way at the end of the season. That's going to be split over 2 weekends, so 2 single game weekends. And, if I'm Red Gendron, I'm just sitting there looking at my chops, no problem taking out Merrimack this weekend. This weekend, the next weekend, this Friday coming up, the Northeastern game, that's a big challenge. And then you get Connecticut, who's been inconsistent but has played well of late. And they got a weekend sweep this weekend, and that is going to be something that we're going to be looking at. Will that be the biggest weekend for Maine in terms of can they clinch home ice, and can they get themselves into that position to maybe even win the regular season? I think it seems so far-fetched a month ago, but right now the thought that Maine could win the Hockey East regular season title, it's real, it's alive, and it feels crazy, but it could happen.
And, Red Gendron pretty much admitted as much. When I asked the question in general terms about home ice advantage, he poo-pooed it. But when you broke it down weekend after weekend, he agreed that he was in a good position because he didn't have to deal with all the travel and all that. And travel from Orono to the rest of the league is not the easiest. So, absolutely, they're in great position. That's going to be fun to watch down the line. A couple other things in Hockey East of note. Boston College in the single game Friday, a 3-0 win over UMass. UMass with just 1 goal in their last 3 games. They need to turn things around a bit. Boston College continuing strong and some nice momentum into tonight's game against BU in the Beanpot.
Yeah, I think BC needed that after, losing back-to-back games in overtime against Maine. But as much as BC needed it, UMass needed that as well because they, as you mentioned, they only scored 1 goal in 2 games against New Hampshire. So I think when you look at that game, you're going to look back on that. And that's a series that they played three times this year. All 3 games won by the road team. And this is for 2 clubs, Boston College and UMass, that have been excellent at home all season. So I think that we'll look back at this game at the end, that one game, and that's going to be an important one in the standings, I think. I can't tell exactly where anybody will be position-wise when all of this is said and done, and we have to kind of look at the league. But certainly I think that BC puts themselves in a much better position by winning that game. And if they can they're going to control their destiny now. They keep those wins going. They keep playing well down the stretch. They, in fact, will be the team hoisting the regular season title.
Turning to the ECAC, the big game of note over the weekend was on Friday as Quinnipiac hosted Cornell. The Bobcats with a 5-0 decision over the Big Red. Unbelievable.
That one just shocked me. And, a head turner, they scored 3 really quick goals in that game to take control of it early, never look back. Keith Petruzzelli in net, solid with the shutout. And the fact that they kept it going and the next night able to take out Colgate 2-1. It's a great weekend for Quinnipiac. They put themselves back into a position, could be in a position to get a first round bye and then home ice in the quarterfinal round. That would be big. That is one of those places. There's not a lot of schools, especially out east, in my opinion, that home ice matters a ton in the playoffs, but Quinnipiac, it does. Their students are fantastic. It's a tough place to play in. So I think that they really would be served well by getting that first round bye and then the home ice in the ECAC quarters.
One other mention in ECAC, Dartmouth had peaked at number 20 in the USCHO.com poll, but haven't been as strong as late and lost both ends of RPI and Union. So a little bit of a downturn for the Big Green after what looked like a really good start in the first half of the season for Bob Gaudette's crew.
Yeah, it certainly was. And we were really high on them, I think just last week, really, thinking that they were, putting themselves in very good position in the standings. But you can't have a weekend where you go without points, and especially when you're playing a team that's below you in Union, a team that was below you entering the weekend in RPI. So this is going to be a tough one to turn around for Dartmouth. I think they needed to stay consistent, but they have the talent. We know that they have a lot of good, talented players. Maybe not the scoring depth that they need, but they have a good back end, a good goaltender. They could make a run here, but this weekend probably threw them off track a little bit. We'll see how much it will take to get them back on that track.
In Atlantic hockey, two teams that have separated themselves from the pack got a little bit more separation with weekend sweeps. And that's Sacred Heart winning on the road at Air Force, a place that is never easy to win, particularly because of the high altitude and the travel, and American International with a weekend sweep as well. So it was a big weekend for both of them. Army split with Canisius, so they opened up some space there. Bentley with a sweep on the weekend has opened up into 5th place. And RIT all alone in 4th place. There's a pretty good race going on for probably 3rd place down in that conference. I don't think anybody's going to catch Sacred Heart or AIC at this point. Yeah,
there will be a battle for first between those two schools. But after that, the real battle, I feel like Army is well positioned, but the real battle is going to be between RIT, Bentley, Air Force, Robert Morris. You can throw them all in that same category for who's going to finish 4th and 5th and get those final 2 buys. And even 4th, then you host that next round as opposed to 5th place where you're going on the road. So that I think is the real battle that we're looking at Atlantic hockey. And then, of course, it will be a real great finish to see AIC. They still do have a game in hand on Sacred Heart. Can they pull out back-to-back regular season titles? That would be a great accomplishment for that program.
Circle Tuesday, February 11th on your calendar, Atlantic hockey fans. Sacred Heart will be at AIC that night. And I've got to say, as good as AIC is, Sacred Heart this year is absolutely the cream of that league. And they would be well-positioned against anybody in the postseason. I don't think you want to take on anybody in a single elimination game that can put 2 or 3 goals together as quickly as Sacred Heart can. There are teams like that, maybe Penn State, maybe Arizona State are teams that come to mind. Sacred Heart is that kind of an offense.
Yeah, I was doing some prep work this past weekend. Was that we pulled the nominations together for the Walter Brown Award. And man, when I started looking at the offensive talent that is going up and down that roster of Sacred Heart, it's really impressive. I mean, we talk about Cotton on the team, and obviously when you have a brother that's had some great success at Boston College, David Cotton, that is Jason Cotton, he gets kind of thrown right into the conversation. Hey, it's David Cotton's brother, but they're neck and neck in points. But you forget about Mike Lee, what a season he is having, and then this past weekend, the guy that stood out, Austin McElmurray. 3 goals on Friday night, adds an assist. I mean, he basically jumped right up into the points conversation. He's one of the best scorers on that team. They just have so many weapons, and those weapons are going to pay them dividends as this season goes on.
Yeah, McElmurray's been a solid and dangerous player for that team. So, yeah, watch out for them. Only one team's going to get in from Atlantic hockey. Sacred Heart now 25th in the PairWise. Even if they win out, it's going to be hard for them to get above the Mendoza line in the PairWise. Let's also mention in non-conference play, Arizona State swept Robert Morris. Robert Morris, a close 5-4 loss to Arizona State on Saturday, but that puts the Sun Devils in 8th place right now in the PairWise. There's a big gap between them and Clarkson at number 7, and a whole bunch of teams on their tail very closely behind. So winning percentage is going to be a big part of that, and that only is about 25% of the RPI. But if you have a high winning percentage, that can be enough to overcome a schedule a little bit. Arizona State needs 4 or 5 wins on the way out.
That's exactly right. I think that if they pull off 4, they're going to put themselves in the position, and they're going to have 2 games out east this weekend, Holy Cross and Bentley, both of them on the road. Both of those could be very tough matchups, but there are 2 that you have to look to get. But if they do, it's strange. I would think at this time of year, 85% of the time, if you're 8th in the PairWise by the time you hit February 1st, you're usually solid and you're usually in a position that you're going to make the NCAA tournament. But you were kind of alluding to it. When you look at the RPIs, Clarkson 0.5532 is their RPI. 0.5481 is Arizona State. That's a pretty big gap because the teams that follow that, UMass just 7/10,000ths of a point behind Arizona State. Ohio State, which is in 10th, they're just 12/10,000ths of a point. So this is really tight. 16/10,000ths is Penn State in 11. You can go all the way down really to 14, and 14 is in a position, Quinnipiac, where if they put a couple of wins together and Arizona State loses, the dynamic of that whole 7-8 team bunch could shift, and Arizona State could fall. We looked at it this weekend with New Hampshire. They were a team that had elevated themselves into the top 15 last weekend. They go on the road. They lose 2 at UConn, and they have become almost irrelevant down to 25th in the PairWise. It's going to be hard to make that up. So that's what 2 losses to teams that are not in the top 30 of the PairWise can do to you. And that is the possibility this weekend for Arizona State as they head out to Holy Cross and Bentley.
And they should not overlook either of those teams. Both of those teams, Holy Cross and Bentley, to me seemed well positioned to be able to slow down an Arizona State team. Both teams play very good defense, and both teams have enough speed to keep up with Arizona State. So these are no gimmies for the Sun Devils.
No, they're certainly not. I had a chance to see Bentley on Friday night this week. And listen, the game wasn't pretty. It was kind of an ugly game, but they knew how to really kind of take the pace out of the game and make it very difficult for Niagara. And I'm assuming they could do that against Arizona State. The whole thing with Arizona State, though, you need to just make sure you don't let them score in bunches. I've never seen a team in recent years get so much momentum off one goal. They get 1, and then it's 2, and then it's 3, and then forget it. Your night's over. So you've got to make sure that you keep them from scoring in bunches.
Well, Jim, moving away from the results on the ice, last Thursday you published a story in the weekly This Week in Hockey East column for USCHO.com about the possibility of Hockey East no longer being an independent league, but some folks looking for that conference to become part of an all-sport conference. That started stirring controversy as soon as you tweeted a preview of the story on Wednesday night last week. What's the summary of that story, and what's the aftermath been like?
Well, it's pretty straightforward. I had started doing a little bit of research into the commissioner search and found out, talking to a couple of people, that was something that was a distinct possibility, that Hockey East had some, the members of Hockey East had some meetings with an all-sport conference. I believe that to be America East, the more that I've talked to people. It could be the CAA. I'm just looking at other conferences that have some sort of a hand in a lot of schools. And America East and CAA, both either through direct membership or affiliation, have a hand into Hockey East programs. But that meeting, I don't really know what the results were and where they will go from there. But the fact that you're even entertaining the thought of kind of letting somebody else take over the administration of your league, the marketing of your league, kind of was surprising to me. It's been a league that's operated autonomously since 1984. It's a strong brand. I've always believed it's a strong brand. There is some irony to this whole thing, because I think when we were talking about Joe Britannia, not being retained at the end of the season after 23 years as commissioner, one of the things that people were saying either on the record or off the record was, Joe hasn't done much to build the brand. Our brand is weak right now. But after, as soon as I started tweeting out things or writing this story, the reaction from everyone, fans, athletic directors, coaches, we have such a strong brand in Hockey East. Well, I guess there's a little bit of talking out of both sides of the mouth when you say that right now. And, one thing that I have been told by some ADs is if they do decide to go this route, they will try to keep the Hockey East name. I've never seen that really happen where you're operated by an all-sport conference, but you keep a different league name. It would help. The only place this really helps, I'm sure there's some financial ramifications, but in terms of what we think of, this might help give them a seat at the table within the NCAA. You could propose legislation through America East or whatever conference it could be. There's ways possibly to make a big benefit at the NCAA level. But you're still not aligning with it's not like you're aligning with a Power 5 conference. It's not like you're joining the ACC. It's not like you're joining the Pac-12 here. You'd still be joining one of the smaller conferences in the NCAA, no matter which conference it is. I don't think it's personally a good idea. It's not something I would like to see happen. But I just, for me, when I heard it, I just felt like it was something that had to be brought to the attention of people out there. And as one athletic director mentioned to me, not an AD, I'm sorry, it was an athletic administrator mentioned to me, this could be a good thing, the fact that this story came out, because this will rile up some of the people that maybe otherwise weren't paying attention. We're talking about university presidents, we're talking about people, trustees, all of that stuff. Maybe that would be something to help get a little bit more support financially from the 11 teams that are currently members of hockey. So we'll see where it goes. All could be a long way off. All might be a big nothing, but I felt it was really important to bring the topic to the table.
Well, a couple quick thoughts on that before we wrap up. First of all, branding. Hockey East is a big brand. NCHC is a big brand, but they're a big brand within a small audience, and that's college hockey fans. NCHC has done the good job in branding through a good digital presence and through a concerted effort among all of its programs to really promote the NCHC brand. I think the teams in that league wear the colors of their league a little bit more prominently than other leagues might. But even so, the other part of it is on the ice. Hockey East has not had a national championship in a while. NCHC's had 5 in a row. So there's that in there. But when you really get down to it, branding within a small audience, you can only do so much. You go outside of hockey. Big Ten's not as big a deal in Division I hockey as a brand, I don't think. But outside of college hockey, everybody knows the Big Ten who's a sports fan. So the schools need to take care of it on the ice. But you know what? The NCHC has laid out the template of how to market your league. They came from nowhere and are very prominent. Do good digital, have good web, have a good TV deal, both streaming and on a network. Those are the things that make the difference. It costs money, but also it just takes a little effort. Follow what they've done, and you'll be in a good spot. So, yeah, I don't think these are anything big to overcome. One of the other things, and I'll leave maybe on this tangent, I'll give you an opportunity to respond. We have College Hockey Inc. representing the sport, and they do a terrific job of it. But there are so many ways that the conferences could work together better to make the sport grow better. And the thing that jumps out at me the most, especially when I talk to fans, is what about one single place to get video from all the leagues? I don't think it's going to happen because I don't think there's enough urge to cooperate there. But why should fans who want to see more than one league have to shell out $600, $700, $800, $900 to see every league when if you had one clearinghouse that was the College Hockey Network that had everything on it that people could watch, that would grow the entire sport. There's a lot more cooperation that needs to happen too. So anyway, I'll throw that one at you.
Yeah, no, I think I'll look at your second point first, in that there is not enough cooperation, and there is a little bit too much of a sense of competition between conferences as opposed to a desire to work together. I do think the Hockey Commissioners Association, which has existed now, I'm ballparking this, I'm going to say 15 years or so, has done a better job at that. It might be even longer than 15 years now that I think about it. But you can't be provincial. You have to have some sort of an ability to work in collaboration. You can't be in. I think that is almost what we use when I look at Hockey East. One of their biggest problems is that there's provincialism between the schools. that schools don't want to work together. So when you're having schools battling each other head on instead of collaborating, working together, compromising, that is where the death of a brand, or at least the struggle of a brand has existed in my eyes. You go back to Lou Lamoriello in 1984 and 85 when he started this league. It was Hockey East, Hockey East, Hockey East, and I think there was the ability to look at the blueprint of what Big East basketball was, and that was all about the brand. You were always talking about the league. You were never talking about the school. But over the last few decades, rivalries developed in the league, some hatred between some of the coaches, some of the athletic directors, maybe even presidents. Who knows? But those internal clashes is what it really is most detrimental. And if Hockey East doesn't find a way to solve those battles first, that is where the brand will suffer the most. And I think that going under an all-sport umbrella will never help that. Those internal battles are the biggest problem that Hockey East faces today. It will continue to for a long time if they don't solve them.
Well, we'll wrap it there for Weekend Review. Our episode has been sponsored by the 2020 NCAA Frozen Four. April 9th and 11th in Detroit. For tickets, visit ncaa.com/Frozen4. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll catch you next time.
This has been the USCHO Weekend Review Podcast, a production of U.S. College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.